This is part 2 of the Tamiya TA02 chassis build for my wife. This is probably the last part in this series. This is a relatively simple series because I've gone over the TA02 multiple times in other videos. But I just wanted to give some update, having had the body painted and mounted and everything, and also some of the smaller mechanical changes I made on the inside. So again, this is the HPI McLaren F1 LM body. Looks nice and pretty. It's a 200mm body, and as I mentioned in the part 1 video, you just get the plus 6mm rims, and they will run relatively flush with the edge of the body. Okay, now I did make the mistake of not marking off the body mounting post holes before painting the body. I was a little overzealous when I painted this, so I had to cut a couple of holes here in the back actually just to make sure I got the mounting positions right. It's actually very difficult to find the right mounting hole positions when you paint it with a color that you can't see through. So this particular color is, I believe it's like a candy red or a metallic red, and I put a black backing on it, so it looks kind of dark. Okay. And the front headlights here, HPI does give you the option of keeping them clear and then mounting like a back piece to this, where you can sort of make the headlights look a little more realistic. I think it looks okay. It doesn't mount perfectly on the TA02. Of course, it's not really meant for it. So if you look at it from the side, you can see it looks a little wonky there. Very big offset between the wheel well, the top of the wheel well, and the top of the wheel. And that has a lot to do with the fact that the shock towers on the TA02 ride fairly high. And so this body is really meant for, I suppose, more modern chassis where the total height from the ground to the top of the shock tower is lower than in the TA02. Okay, so not really perfectly mounted on this chassis, but at least the wheelbase is reasonable. There may be some problems with, the rear wheel here rubbing up against the rear bumper. So, you know, I could maybe trim it just a tad more, but for the most part, at least, you know, for someone, if you're giving this to a beginner, like, again, this is for my wife, not a big deal. I don't think she'll care too much about that. But in any case, let me try to take off the body here. These teeny tiny clips. These Tamiya body clips are always a pain because they're so small, and they're just a pain. Now what I actually do, maybe this is just a little side note, on all my body clips, my Tamiya chassis, my associated chassis, every one of them pretty much, I bend the ends there. So if you basically take a set of pliers and you hold it down right about here, and you take another set of pliers and bend this up, it just makes it a lot easier to pull the body clips off. Okay. I don't remember where I learned it from, but that's where I learned it. Okay, so let's see if I can pull this off with one hand here. Pull this off. So on the back here, like I was saying, there's this extra plastic piece here. It's just a little housing, and you mount the headlight decal in the back there. I actually have an old Kyosho McLaren F1 GTR body that is very similar in terms of how the headlights are. But yeah, it looks nice. All of these bits here, this black bit here, the black fillings here, the black lining, those are all decals. And this is a decal. The windshield washer's a decal. There's a lot of decals in here, okay? This here is actually one decal. You just lay it over the whole thing. So it looks nice from a distance, but when you zoom in, actually, I mean, it's still okay, but it's not as intricate as say, the Kyosho McLaren F1 body, which I don't even know if they make anymore. I got that back in '96 or so. Okay, so this is what I did. Again, just like in the other TA02 I have that I converted to a Top Force, I have this Yeah Racing drive shaft, right? The shocks, everything. One thing to note, the lighting's not very good here. The camber links on the front and rear, I did change those Let me see if I can, just give me a second, if I can find the older links. Oh, I must have put them away. Okay, so the original camber links that came with this were, I think they were part of the Racing Special chassis, and they were okay. I mean, they did have, like, they were basically a turnbuckle. They had a little sort of hex portion in the center that you can use to adjust camber with the camber links mounted. The problem was, with no matter what ball cup I tried using, if I screwed it in all the way, for the ball cups on either side, the total length of the camber length was still too large for the chassis, which is kind of strange. And I would end up getting a whole lot of positive camber. So what I eventually had to do was to just take those camber links out and just use basically a set screw, just a long set screw, and then mount the ball studs on either side of that. And I just did that for all four corners of the chassis. Okay. I had mentioned in the first video that I needed to find a way to sort of substitute on this side for the battery mount portion of this chassis that was missing here when I bought this chassis. I did look on eBay and I found a J parts tree for this chassis that someone was offering, but it was like 50 bucks. So not really worth it for just one part. So basically I just took some zip ties and put together this kind of ghetto sort of assembly here. I'm not particularly proud of it, but I really didn't have many other options. So there's just one set of zip ties here, one zip tie here, and then another one here, and it just sort of allows this whole thing to compress a little bit as you push the battery in from this side. Okay, so it works, but it just doesn't look that pretty. Receiver I mounted on top of the steering servo here. This is a high-tech shredder. It's a really old receiver. It's an AM receiver. There's a Novak Tempest, Trinity Speed Gems 12-turn double. It's a DC motor. So those of you who are old enough will remember DC motors. You had to put capacitors between the terminals and a Schottky diode, also between the positive and negative terminals, to minimize against glitching. Let me see. I think that's pretty much it. The big one was really these camber links. Just trying to make them small enough so that I can actually get negative static camber if I actually wanted to adjust for that. But basically it's done. The chassis was mostly done when I made the first video. I just had to do the body and mount it. And again, you can probably see here if I just flip this sideways, okay, and I go top down, the top of the shock tower is pretty tall. Okay, in more modern chassis, especially if you look at something like the TA02, it has an inboard front suspension, so the shocks are laying down like this. The shock tower doesn't have to be so tall. Okay, and on the rear, it's actually even taller. All right, so this does limit how low the body can sit, because especially on the McLaren body, right, this front nose wants to taper down, and so the shock tower is just going to push this whole thing up. So not really meant for the TA02, but it will mount. It'll look a little bit goofy. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this guy. I mean, I haven't really made any changes. I had thought about getting universal drive shafts for the rear, because these are still dog bones in the rear, but they are universals in the front. For now, I'm just want to save some money. I've decided against that. This doesn't really need it. But if ever you are going to get universal drive shafts for the TA02, please note that the front and rear are different. They are not interchangeable. So on the front, actually, I do have these in here, I think. Yes. Okay. So the front looks like this. All right. So this is your drive shaft, and then this is the outdrive that mounts into the hub carrier. Okay. And notice how the shaft is tapered. So here's the hole where you put the drive pin in, and then it tapers out once, and then it tapers out again. All right. Now for the rear, you don't have this. The rear is just a single diameter shaft for the outdrive, or that goes into the hub carrier. So if you're going to order, GPM or any other type of universals for this, make sure you are specific about finding front or rear universals depending on, you know, which ones you need. So I had ordered a set of front drive shafts, mistakenly thinking they can go in the rear, and they couldn't, so I have to get a set of rears for it. But for now, I'm just going to not bother with it. I do have some nice blue aluminum fronts that I had ordered for the rear, but I just put them in the front. So this is basically it. I haven't run it yet, but I assume it will go reasonably quick. A 12-turn double DC motor would be kind of equivalent to something like, maybe a 5,000 kV or 5,500 kV motor, for a modern brushless motor. But the power output is not that high. I mean, modern brushless motors that are around the 5,000 kV range are, they can pump out maybe 300 watts, 350 watts, maybe even more than that. DC motors like this, they're maybe around 200 watts in terms of their power output. But in terms of their RPM, they're around 5,000 kV or so, give or take, a little bit. So it's more than fast enough for a beginner. And that's pretty much it for this one.